I was sitting in the living room eating the peppermints that I found when my dad yelled, "Are you eating peppermints?" "Yeah?" I said, looking up from the couch. I'd already eaten 4. They tasted weird, kind of bitter, but I figured that's just how adult mints were. Dad's face went completely white. "Oh God, oh no, no, no." He grabbed the tin from me, staring at it like it was a bomb. "These aren't regular mints." "What do you mean?" But he was already screaming for Mom. "Clara, get in here, now!" Mom came running from the kitchen, saw Dad holding the tin and me with mint dust on my fingers, and immediately started crying. "Tell me he didn't eat your— He ate 4! 4! Mom grabbed her car keys so fast she knocked over a lamp. "Hospital, NOW. "What's wrong with the mints?" I asked, but my heart was already starting to feel weird. Like, really weird. Fast. "They're medicine mints," Dad said, carrying me to the car. "Very strong medicine that kids shouldn't have." My sister came out as we were backing down the driveway. "Where are you going?" "Hospital," Mom yelled out the window. "Your brother ate Dad's special mints." Even from the car, I could see my sister's face change. She knew something I didn't. In the car, Dad kept checking my pulse. "How do you feel?" "Dizzy? Hot? Is your heart racing?" "Yeah," I said, and it was true. My heart was going so fast it felt like when I ran the mile in PE, except I was just sitting there. "It's gonna be okay," Mom said, but she ran 3 red lights. "What kind of medicine?" I asked. My face felt really hot now. Dad and Mom exchanged a look. It's for grown-ups. For blood flow. Like aspirin?" "Not exactly," Dad muttered. We screeched into the ER parking lot. Dad carried me in yelling about accidental ingestion of medication and 50 milligrams times 5, and numbers that meant nothing to me but made the nurse's eyes go huge. They rushed me straight back. No waiting. That scared me more than anything. "We need to monitor his heart," the nurse said, hooking me up to machines. The beeping was so fast. "His blood pressure is concerning for his age." "Am I dying?" I asked, and Mom started crying harder. "No, baby, no. The medicine is just very strong." The doctor came in, looked at my chart, looked at my dad. "Sildenafil? In peppermint form?" Dad's face was redder than I'd ever seen it. "I have a prescription. They're compounded. I keep them locked up, but I was reorganizing and— I understand." The doctor turned to me. "How are you feeling?" "My heart won't slow down, and I'm really hot. And I didn't know how to explain the weird feeling in my whole body. We need to monitor him closely," the doctor told my parents. "That's a significant dose for a child his size. The cardiac effects could be serious." They moved me to a different room, more machines, and forth. Everyone kept checking the heart monitor and whispering. "What's wrong with my heart?" I kept asking, but the beeping was getting faster. "Your heart is working very hard right now," the nurse explained. "The medicine Daddy takes is making it work too hard." I heard them say things like tachycardia and blood pressure dropping and might need to intervene. Dad held my hand. "I'm so sorry, buddy. I should have been more careful." "What are the mints for?" I asked. My chest felt tight now, different from before. Dad looked at Mom. Mom looked at the doctor. Nobody wanted to answer. "They help Daddy with grown-up stuff," Mom finally said. My sister had texted me, "OMG, do you know what you ate?" "Dad's Viagra mints, and that's why they're freaking." I didn't know what Viagra was, but the way everyone was acting, it was bad. Really bad. The heart monitor started making different sounds. Urgent sounds. The nurse called for the doctor. "His rhythm is irregular," she said. "His heart rate is 167. 167? In health class, they said normal was like 80. "Am I having a heart attack?" I asked. The words came out small. The doctor was suddenly moving very fast, calling for medications, more doctors. The room filled with people. "We need to slow his heart rate down," someone said. "This could go either way." Someone pushed a needle into my IV line and I felt cold liquid rush into my arm. The doctor kept his hand on my wrist, counting under his breath while watching the monitor. A nurse appeared with a small white cup of pills and crushed them up right there, mixing the powder with water. She held the cup to my lips and told me to drink it all, even though it tasted awful and chalky. I swallowed it down while Dad squeezed my hand so tight it almost hurt. The room was packed with people now, all of them watching the screens and writing things down on clipboards. Someone adjusted the IV bag hanging above me and said something about pushing more fluids. My chest still felt tight and weird, like someone was sitting on it. The beeping from the heart monitor filled the whole room, so fast it didn't even sound like individual beeps anymore. Just one long, urgent noise. Dad kept whispering that he was sorry, over and over, his voice cracking. Mom stood against the wall with her hand over her mouth, tears running down her face. The doctor checked the monitor again and said my rhythm was still irregular, but the medication should start working soon. I tried to focus on breathing slowly like they kept telling me to, but it was hard when my heart felt like it was trying to jump out of my chest. A different nurse came in with another machine and stuck cold patches on my chest, connecting more wires. Everything felt cold and hot at the same time. The doctor told everyone to give him numbers every 2 minutes, and people started calling out things like blood pressure and oxygen levels that meant nothing to me. Time felt weird, like it was moving too fast and too slow all at once. I could see the clock on the wall, but the minutes didn't seem real. Dad's hand in mine was the only thing that felt solid and real. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 20 minutes, the beeping started to sound different. Slower. The doctor looked at the monitor and his face relaxed just a little bit. He said my heart rate was dropping, down to 148 now. Mom let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. The doctor explained that it was progress, but still way too high for a kid my age. They were going to keep giving me fluids and watching me really carefully for the next few hours. He said the medication I took was very strong, and they needed to make sure nothing got worse as my body tried to process it all. I asked if that meant I was going to be okay, and he said they were doing everything they could to make sure of it. The room started to clear out a little as some of the extra doctors and nurses left. Only a few people stayed, but they all kept their eyes on the monitors. Dad finally sat down in the chair next to my bed, but he didn't let go of my hand. The fact that the numbers were going down instead of up made me feel a tiny bit less scared, but I was still really scared. My whole body felt wrong and tired, and I just wanted everything to go back to normal. Another doctor came in, this one older with gray hair and glasses. He introduced himself, but I didn't catch his name. He started talking to my parents in a low voice about vasodilation and blood pressure and cardiac stress. I heard him say that kids my size shouldn't have this much of the drug in their system. He mentioned something about watching for organ stress and making sure my kidneys were handling everything okay. Mom started crying again when he said that. The specialist asked my parents questions about exactly how many mints I ate and what time it happened, and how long before we got to the hospital. Dad answered everything, his voice flat and tired. The doctor nodded and made notes on his tablet. He said they were going to run some blood tests to check my kidney and liver function, just to be safe. A nurse came in to take blood from my arm and I had to look away because I hate needles. Mom finally stopped crying long enough to pull out her phone. She stepped into the hallway and I could hear her voice, shaky and upset, talking to my sister. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught phrases like serious and overnight, and the doctors are taking care of him. My sister's voice came through the phone loud enough that I could hear her panicked questions even from my bed. Mom kept saying I was going to be okay, but they wanted to keep me for observation. The call lasted a few minutes, and when Mom came back in, her eyes were red and puffy. She told me my sister wanted to come to the hospital, but Mom said no, she should stay home and we'd call her with updates. The nurse who had been there since we arrived came over to check my blood pressure again. She wrapped the cuff around my arm and it squeezed tight before releasing with a hiss. She wrote the numbers down on a chart clipped to the end of my bed. She told me her name was Megan Hoover, and she was going to be taking care of me for the rest of her shift. She explained that she'd be checking my blood pressure every 15 minutes and monitoring my heart rate constantly. She said I was doing a really good job staying calm, and that was helping a lot. I didn't feel calm at all inside, but I guess I wasn't crying or freaking out, so maybe that counted. Megan adjusted my pillow and asked if I needed anything. I said I was thirsty, and she brought me a cup of water with a straw. Drinking helped my throat, which had gotten really dry from breathing so fast earlier. Another half hour passed with Megan coming over every 15 minutes like clockwork to take my blood pressure and check the monitors. Each time she wrote the numbers down carefully. Dad sat in his chair like a statue, still holding my hand. Mom paced back and forth, checking her phone and looking at the monitors. The doctor came back and checked the screen. He said my heart rate was down to 132 now, which was encouraging but still not good enough. He told my parents the medication could stay in my system for several hours, and they needed to make sure my body could handle it as everything processed through. I asked him if I was going to die, and the words came out smaller than I meant them to. He looked right at me and said, "No, I wasn't going to die. But they were being very careful to make sure I stayed safe." That should have made me feel better, but it didn't really. The afternoon turned into evening and the light coming through the window changed. My heart rate kept dropping slowly. Megan kept taking my blood pressure. Dad kept holding my hand. Mom kept pacing. A man in a suit came into the room and introduced himself as Patrick Wynn from the hospital social work department. Dad's face, which had been pale and worried, turned bright red. Mr. Wynn explained in a calm voice that anytime a child accidentally takes adult medication, the hospital has to do an interview to make sure it was really an accident and that the home is safe. He said it was just procedure, nothing personal. Dad nodded and said he understood, but he looked completely humiliated. Mr. Wynn said he'd need to talk to me alone in a little bit, and then to my parents separately. The way he said it made it sound official and serious. After Mr. Wynn left, a different nurse came in and said they were moving me to an observation room where I'd stay for the night. She unhooked some of the machines and started wheeling my bed out of the ER. The observation room was quieter and felt less scary somehow. It had a regular hospital bed instead of the ER gurney, and a chair that folded out into a bed for parents to sleep in. There was a TV on the wall and a window that looked out over the parking lot. Mom immediately started setting up in the chair next to my bed, pulling out her phone charger and settling in. Dad kept pacing around the room, running his hands through his hair and looking guilty and stressed. The monitors were still there, still beeping with my heartbeat, but everything felt less urgent now. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out to see a text from my sister asking how I was feeling and if I needed anything. I texted back that I was okay, but embarrassed and really tired. She sent back a bunch of heart emojis and then wrote that she wasn't going to tell anyone what happened. That made me feel a little bit better about the whole thing. At least I wouldn't have to deal with everyone at the school knowing about this. Around dinner time, Megan came in to check my vitals again. She smiled when she looked at the monitor and said my heart rate was down to 118. My blood pressure was getting closer to normal too. She left and came back with Dr. Archer, the main doctor who'd been taking care of me. He looked at all the numbers on the chart and said I was responding really well to the treatment. He said the worst seemed to be over, but he still wanted to keep me overnight to make sure there were no delayed effects or complications. Hearing him say the worst was over made my whole body relax in a way I hadn't realized I'd been tense. Mom started crying again, but this time it was different, like she was relieved instead of scared. Dad finally sat back down and put his head in his hands. Patrick came back about half an hour later carrying a clipboard and wearing a gentle smile that was probably supposed to make me feel comfortable. He asked if he could talk to me alone for a few minutes, and my parents looked at each other nervously before nodding and stepping out into the hallway. The door closed behind them with a soft click that made the room feel suddenly bigger and quieter. Patrick pulled up the chair next to my bed and sat down, setting his clipboard on his lap. He told me this was just a regular conversation to understand what happened and that I wasn't in any kind of trouble. I nodded even though my stomach felt tight with nerves. He asked me to tell him in my own words what happened that afternoon before we came to the hospital. I explained how I found the tin on the coffee table while I was watching TV and thought they were just regular mints because they looked like the kind Mom keeps in her purse. Patrick wrote stuff down while I talked, his pen moving quickly across the paper. I told him they tasted weird and bitter, but I figured that's how adult mints were supposed to taste, so I ate 4 of them before Dad came in and freaked out. Patrick asked if anyone had ever told me not to take medication that wasn't mine, and I said yeah, lots of times. But I really didn't think they were medicine because they just looked like mints in a regular tin. He nodded and wrote more notes. Then he asked if Dad usually kept his medication locked up, and I told him yes, in a box in his closet, but I guess he was moving stuff around or something. Patrick asked a few more questions about where the tin was exactly, and whether I'd ever seen it before, and how long it took before I started feeling sick. I answered everything honestly because I didn't want him to think I was lying or that my parents were bad at keeping me safe. After about 15 minutes of questions, Patrick told me I did a really good job explaining everything and that accidents happen even in the most careful families. He said the important thing was making sure it didn't happen again and that my parents were already working on a plan to keep all medications extra secure. That made me feel a little better even though I still felt embarrassed about the whole thing. Patrick stood up and told me he was going to talk to my parents now and that I should just relax and watch TV or play on my phone. He stepped out into the hallway, and I could see him gesture for Mom and Dad to follow him down the corridor away from my door. I couldn't hear most of what they were saying, but every few seconds phrases would drift back to me through the partially open door. I heard Patrick say something about medication storage protocols and Dad's voice responding but too quiet to make out the words. Then I caught the phrase safety plan and follow-up visit and Mom saying something that sounded like agreement. I tried not to listen too hard because it felt like eavesdropping, but I couldn't help catching bits and pieces. Dad's face through the window in the door looked completely red and miserable, like he wanted to sink through the floor and disappear. Patrick was gesturing with his hands in a way that seemed calm and professional, not angry or accusing, but Dad still looked like he was lectured by a principal. The conversation went on for maybe 10 minutes before they all walked back toward my room. When they came back in, Patrick shook hands with both my parents and told them he'd be checking in tomorrow morning before I was discharged. He gave me a little wave and told me to feel better soon, then left with his clipboard tucked under his arm. Mom came over and sat down on the edge of my hospital bed, careful not to disturb any of the wires still attached to me. She looked tired but calmer than she had been all day, like talking to Patrick had actually helped somehow instead of making things worse. She reached over and brushed some hair off my forehead in that mom way that's supposed to be comforting. Then she started explaining in a quiet voice that Dad takes the medication for a medical condition that lots of men deal with as they get older. She said it's nothing to be embarrassed about or ashamed of, it's just something his doctor prescribed to help with blood flow and circulation. I nodded even though I was still pretty confused about the whole thing. Mom continued saying that's exactly why the medication is kept locked up normally, because it's very strong and meant only for adults and could be dangerous for kids. She apologized for not being more careful about making sure everything was put away securely after Dad was reorganizing. I told her it was okay, and that I should have asked before eating anything I found lying around. She squeezed my hand and said we all learned an important lesson today about medication safety. The way she said it made it sound less scary and more like something we could actually learn from and move past. Dad was still standing near the window looking guilty, but he gave me a small, sad smile when I looked over at him. My sister showed up around 8 o'clock carrying a big canvas bag stuffed with my things from home. She came through the door and immediately walked over to give me a careful hug, being mindful of all the tubes and wires. She whispered in my ear that she was really glad I was okay and that she'd been worried all afternoon. Having her there made the sterile hospital room feel less lonely and scary somehow. She pulled stuff out of the bag one item at a time, setting each thing on the little table next to my bed. My favorite blue hoodie that I wear all the time came out first, then my pajamas with the dinosaur pattern that I'm probably too old for but still like anyway. She'd remembered my phone charger and even brought my portable game system in case I got bored. Mom hugged her and thanked her for thinking of everything. My sister sat down in the other chair and asked how I was feeling now. I told her much better than before but still kind of tired and shaky. She pulled out her phone and showed me a funny video she'd seen earlier to try to cheer me up. We watched a few videos together while Mom and Dad talked quietly near the window about logistics and schedules for tomorrow. The night nurse came in to do another round of vital checks, pressing buttons on the machines and wrapping the blood pressure cuff around my arm. She looked at the monitor and smiled, telling everyone that my heart rate was down to 105 beats per minute. She said that was almost normal for someone my age, and a huge improvement from the scary numbers earlier. She checked a few more things on her tablet, and then told my parents they should really try to get some rest since it looked like I was stabilizing well, and the worst was definitely over. Mom nodded, but I could tell she wasn't planning to sleep much. Dad finally sat down in the other chair, the one that supposedly folded out into a bed, but he still had that look on his face like he was beating himself up inside for what happened. My sister said she should probably head home since visiting hours were almost over, but she'd come back in the morning if I was still here. She gave me another hug and told me to text her if I needed anything during the night. After she left, the room felt quieter again with just me and my parents and the steady beeping of the heart monitor. I tried to sleep, but it was basically impossible even though I felt exhausted down to my bones. The monitors kept beeping every few seconds in this rhythm that should have been soothing but actually kept me awake. Nurses came in every couple of hours to check things and take my blood pressure and temperature, which meant I'd just start drifting off, and then someone would flip on the lights and wake me up again. Mom dozed in her chair but woke up every time a nurse came in. Dad never really seemed to sleep at all, just sat there staring at his phone or looking at me with worried eyes. Around midnight, I started getting a really bad headache that felt like pressure building behind my eyes. My face felt hot again too, which immediately scared me because I thought maybe my heart was going to start racing again like before. I told Mom I didn't feel good, and she called the nurse right away. The nurse came in and checked all my vitals while I tried not to panic. She explained in a calm voice that headaches and feeling hot were normal side effects of the medication leaving my system and nothing to worry about. She gave me something for the headache, some kind of pain medicine through my IV, and told me it should help within about 15 minutes. Mom held my hand and stayed right next to my bed until the medicine kicked in and the headache started fading. I finally fell asleep sometime after that with Mom's hand still holding mine. I woke up around 6 in the morning when early light was just starting to come through the window. I felt much better than I had the night before, though still tired and a little shaky when I tried to sit up. The morning nurse came in right away to do her checks, going through the same routine of blood pressure and temperature and looking at all the numbers on the monitors. She wrote everything down and told me with a bright smile that everything looked really good. Dr. Archer showed up during morning rounds about half an hour later, reading through my chart and asking me questions about how I felt. I told him honestly that I felt pretty normal except for being tired. He listened to my heart with his stethoscope and checked a bunch of other things before telling my parents that if my numbers stayed stable for a few more hours, I could probably go home this afternoon. Hearing that made me feel so relieved I almost wanted to cry. Mom looked like she might actually cry from relief. Dad just nodded and asked what we needed to do to make sure I'd be okay at home. Patrick came back mid-morning carrying a folder full of paperwork and looking very official in his suit. He sat down with my parents and went through a whole list of things they needed to do as part of something he called a home safety plan. I listened from my bed as he explained about getting a lockbox specifically for medications, doing a complete inventory of what medicines and supplements were in the house, and having a family meeting about medication safety rules. He had actual forms that my parents had to sign promising to do all these things. Mom and Dad agreed to everything without arguing or making excuses, just nodding and signing where Patrick pointed. He gave them a list of approved lockbox models and said someone from the hospital would follow up in about a week to make sure everything was set up properly. The whole thing felt very official and serious, but Patrick's voice stayed calm and helpful the entire time. Before he left, he shook hands with my parents again and told them he could tell they were taking this seriously and doing everything right. The phone on the wall rang around 10:30, and the nurse answered it, then handed it to Mom saying it was the toxicology consultant. Mom put it on speaker, so Dad could hear too. A woman's voice came through explaining that based on my weight and the amount of medication I'd taken, most of it should be out of my system by this evening. She recommended I take it easy for the next few days and avoid any hard exercise or sports while my body fully recovered from the stress. That meant no PE class this week, which honestly was completely fine with me since I hate running laps anyway. She asked if I had any lingering symptoms and I told her just feeling tired. She said that was completely normal and should go away in another day or two. Mom thanked her for calling and hung up looking more relaxed than she had since this whole thing started. My sister came back around 11 carrying a bag from the cafeteria with breakfast sandwiches and coffee for Mom. She'd also brought Mom a change of clothes since Mom had been wearing the same thing since yesterday afternoon. We all sat around eating breakfast together, which felt surprisingly normal considering we were in a hospital room surrounded by medical equipment. While we were eating, my sister asked me if I was worried about going back to the school and what kids might say if they found out what happened. I admitted that I was absolutely scared of being known as the Viagra kid for the rest of middle school. Just thinking about it made my stomach hurt. My sister said most kids probably wouldn't find out the details, and even if they did, middle schoolers have short attention spans and would move on to new gossip pretty fast. That made me feel slightly better, but I was still dreading walking back into school and facing everyone. Mom stepped away from my bed and walked over to where Dad was standing by the window. She kept her voice low, but I could still hear her suggest that we should call the school counselor before I went back. Dad's whole body went stiff and he shook his head hard. I watched them move to the corner of the room where they thought I couldn't hear them arguing in whispers. Dad kept saying something about his private medical business and how many people already knew too much. Mom's hands moved around as she talked back to him, her face getting more determined. The whispered argument went back and forth for a few minutes while my sister and I just sat there pretending not to listen. Mom finally raised her voice just enough that I caught her saying kids already knew something happened because I left school early and never came back. She said getting ahead of the story was way better than letting rumors spread and make things worse. Dad's shoulders dropped and he nodded slowly, looking completely miserable about agreeing. Mom came back to my bed and told me we'd call the school counselor together before I went back to make sure she could help manage any questions. I felt relieved that someone at the school would know the real story instead of whatever crazy rumors might be going around. Around noon, Dr. Archer came back into my room carrying his tablet and looking at my chart. He listened to my heart again with his stethoscope and checked the monitor readings from the last few hours. He told my parents that my vitals had been completely stable for 6 hours straight without any problems. He said he felt comfortable discharging me with instructions to follow up with my regular pediatrician in a few days. Hearing those words made my chest feel lighter and heavier at the same time. I was so relieved to be leaving the hospital and getting away from all the machines and monitoring. But I also felt anxious about going back to normal life and having to face school and explain what happened. Dr. Archer asked if I had any questions, and I shook my head because I just wanted to go home. Before we could start getting ready to leave, Dad asked Dr. Archer if they could talk privately for a minute. They stepped out into the hallway, and I watched through the window as Dad talked seriously, and Dr. Archer nodded and responded. They were out there for maybe 5 minutes before they came back in together. Dad told us he'd ordered a proper lockbox online that would arrive in a couple days. He said until it got there, he was going to keep his medication at his office at work instead of bringing it home. It was a small thing, but hearing him say it out loud made me feel like he was really taking this seriously. Mom squeezed his hand and told him that was a good plan. A woman in business clothes came into the room carrying a folder and introduced herself as someone from the billing department. She sat down with my parents and started going over numbers and costs from my stay. I heard her say things like emergency room visit and overnight observation and specialist consultation. Each thing she listed made Mom's face get tighter and more stressed looking. The woman explained they could set up a payment plan to make it more manageable. Mom said they'd figure it out and sign some papers. I felt guilty sitting there knowing this whole thing was costing my family so much money because I ate mints I shouldn't have touched. The billing woman left, and Mom put the folder in her bag without saying anything about the cost. We finally got the discharge paperwork around 2 in the afternoon. Megan came in one last time to go over everything with my parents. She gave them a sheet with warning signs to watch for over the next few days. She told them to bring me back immediately if I had any chest pain or trouble breathing, or if my heart started racing again. She looked at me and smiled, telling me I was a great patient and she was glad I was feeling better. I thanked her for being so nice during everything. She helped me get unhooked from the last monitor and took out my IV, which stung a little but wasn't too bad. Mom gathered up all our stuff while Dad went to pull the car around to the entrance. The car ride home was really quiet at first. Nobody turned on the radio, and we just drove in silence for a while. Dad finally broke the quiet by clearing his throat and starting to apologize for real this time. He explained he'd been reorganizing his nightstand and left the tin out for just a few minutes while he was sorting things. He said that was all it took for me to find them, and he should have been more careful. His voice sounded heavy with guilt and regret. I told him I forgave him because I could see how bad he felt about the whole thing. I said I knew it was an accident and he didn't mean for any of this to happen. Mom reached over and squeezed Dad's shoulder from the passenger seat. When we got home, Dad didn't even wait to bring stuff inside before taking me straight to his bedroom. He opened his closet and showed me a locked metal toolbox on the very top shelf. He explained that all his medications were in there now, where nobody could accidentally get to them. He handed the only key to Mom right in front of me and promised he'd be more careful until the real lockbox arrived. Watching my parents deal with all this was embarrassing, but I appreciated that they were actually taking steps to fix things. My sister had beaten us home and already had the couch set up with blankets and pillows. She told me to get comfortable and turned on my favorite show without me even asking. She sat down next to me, and we didn't talk about what happened at all. We just hung out watching TV like we normally would on any regular day. It felt really good to have something feel normal again after all the chaos of the last 24 hours. That evening after dinner, Mom took her phone into the kitchen to make a call. I could hear her talking to Dr. Temple, my regular pediatrician, about scheduling a follow-up appointment. When she came back, she told us Dr. Temple wanted to see me in 2 days to check my heart and make sure everything was back to normal. She also said Dr. Temple wanted to talk to my parents about the home safety plan, which meant more embarrassing conversations were coming. Mom grabbed her laptop from the kitchen table and set it up on the coffee table where I was sitting. She opened the video call app and started dialing the school counselor while I sat there feeling my stomach twist into knots. The screen connected, and Ms. McGregor appeared, sitting at her desk with bookshelves behind her. Mom explained what happened using careful words that didn't give away the embarrassing details. She said I'd had an accidental medication ingestion that required a hospital stay, but I was fully recovered now. Ms. McGregor nodded along and asked a few questions about my current condition and when I might be ready to come back. Mom told her I was physically fine, but we were concerned about how to handle questions from other students. Ms. McGregor looked directly at the camera and told me she understood this was a difficult situation. She said we could work together on a plan for handling any questions or comments when I returned to the school. Her voice was calm and matter-of-fact, like this was just another problem she dealt with all the time. That made me feel slightly less panicked about the whole thing. Ms. McGregor suggested I take an extra day to recover and come back Thursday instead of Wednesday. She also offered to talk to my teachers privately so they'd know I was dealing with a medical issue and could cut me some slack on missed work. I felt grateful for the extra day because the thought of walking into school tomorrow made me want to throw up. Mom thanked her and they ended the call after agreeing to touch base again tomorrow. I sat there staring at the blank laptop screen feeling relieved that at least someone at the school would be on my side. My sister came downstairs and announced she was ordering pizza for dinner because nobody felt like cooking after the day we'd had. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through options while asking what everyone wanted. Dad said he didn't care, and Mom just nodded absently. My sister ordered 2 large pizzas with different toppings so everyone could have something they liked. While we waited for the delivery, she started telling this funny story about her roommate at college who accidentally locked herself out of their dorm room wearing only a towel. She acted out the whole thing with dramatic gestures and voices, making it way funnier than it probably was. Mom actually laughed for the first time all day, and even Dad cracked a smile. For those few minutes, we were just a normal family listening to a funny story instead of dealing with a medical emergency and embarrassment. The pizza arrived and we all sat around the kitchen table eating together. My sister kept the conversation going with more college stories and questions about what everyone had been up to. She didn't mention the hospital or the medication or anything related to what happened. It felt really good to talk about normal stuff and just be together without the weight of everything hanging over us. After dinner, Dad cleared his throat and asked if I wanted to talk for a minute. My stomach dropped because I knew what was coming. We went into the living room and sat on the couch while Mom cleaned up in the kitchen. Dad looked uncomfortable and kept fidgeting with his hands. He started explaining what the medication was actually for using words that weren't too detailed but were honest. He said it was for blood flow issues that some men deal with as they get older, and it was a completely normal medical thing that lots of people needed. He emphasized that there was nothing weird or wrong about taking it. I felt my face get hot with embarrassment, but I appreciated that he was being straight with me instead of making up some story. He explained that the medication worked by increasing blood flow to certain areas, and that's why it was so dangerous for a kid to take that much. My heart couldn't handle the strain the way an adult's could. I nodded along even though I really didn't want to be having this conversation. Dad finished by saying he should have been more careful with storage, and he was sorry I had to learn about all this the hard way. Mom came in from the kitchen and sat down with us. She added that the bigger lesson here was about medication safety in general. She made it clear that all medications were off limits, unless they were specifically prescribed to me by a doctor. She listed out new household rules while Dad and I listened. No taking anything from the medicine cabinet ever. No sharing medications with friends even if they seemed harmless. Always ask an adult first before taking any pill or medicine. She said these rules weren't about punishment, but about keeping everyone safe. I agreed to follow the rules because after spending a night in the hospital, I definitely wasn't going to mess around with medications again. That night, I finally got to sleep in my own bed for the first time since the hospital. I climbed under my familiar blankets and felt relieved to be home and okay. My body was still tired and a little sore from everything, but mostly I just felt grateful. I could hear my parents talking quietly in their room down the hall, and I knew they were probably still processing everything that happened. I fell asleep listening to the normal sounds of home instead of hospital machines beeping. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight coming through my window instead of fluorescent hospital lights. Dad was already at his computer sending an email to Miss McGregor. He asked me to come read it before he sent it. The email gave her permission to share basic information with my teachers if needed. He also asked her advice on how to handle things if other students asked questions. I told him it looked good and he hit send. Ms. McGregor responded within 20 minutes with a simple script I could use if anyone asked. She suggested I say I had a medical issue. I was fine now and I'd rather not talk about it. The script felt doable and I practiced saying it a few times in my head. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister, asking if I wanted her to come home again this weekend. I texted back that she didn't have to, but I appreciated the offer. She sent back a long message saying she was going to shut down any jokes or comments if she heard anything from her friends who had younger siblings at my school. She said nobody was going to mess with her little brother. That made me feel protected even though she was 2 hours away at college. Wednesday morning, a package arrived with next day shipping. Dad brought the box upstairs and opened it in his closet. He pulled out a black metal lockbox with a combination lock on the front. He set it up on the shelf and showed the whole family where it was and how it worked. He transferred all his medications from the temporary toolbox into the new lockbox and made sure everything fit properly. Mom wrote down the combination in her phone, and Dad made sure she knew how to open it. He explained that this was where all prescription medications would be stored from now on. Seeing the concrete step made everyone feel more secure about preventing another accident. Wednesday afternoon, Mom's phone rang with an unknown number. She answered it, and I watched her face change as she listened. She told whoever was calling that she understood, and yes, Friday morning would work. After she hung up, she explained it was a caseworker from CPS calling to schedule a home visit. She said this was standard procedure for any pediatric medication ingestion, and we weren't in trouble. I could tell she was nervous, though, by the way she immediately started tidying up the living room. The visit was scheduled for Friday morning, which gave us 2 days to prepare. Mom spent the rest of the afternoon making sure the house was clean and organized. She kept saying it was fine and just routine, but her actions showed she was worried about making a good impression. Dad came home early from work, and they talked quietly about what to expect during the visit. I tried not to think about a stranger from CPS coming to our house to inspect how we lived. Wednesday morning, I woke up late and just stayed in my room for a while. Mom brought me toast and orange juice on a tray, which felt weird but nice. She sat on the edge of my bed and asked how I was feeling. I told her my body felt okay, but I was nervous about school. She said I could take the day to rest, and that was fine with me. I opened my laptop and checked the emails from my teachers. Mrs. Harrison sent math worksheets. Mr. Chen sent reading assignments. Ms. Rodriguez sent a science packet. I worked through the math first because that was easiest. My brain felt slow, and I had to read some problems twice. The science packet was about cells, and I got through half before I needed a break. I kept thinking about tomorrow and what kids would say. Would everyone know what happened? Would they make jokes? My stomach felt tight every time I thought about walking into school. Mom checked on me around lunch and brought a sandwich. She didn't ask about the schoolwork, just sat with me while I ate. Dad came home early from work and knocked on my door. He asked if I wanted to watch a movie together. We went downstairs and put on something funny. It helped distract me for a while. My sister texted asking how I was doing. I sent back that I was fine, just bored. She said she'd call me later. The afternoon dragged by slowly. I finished the science packet and started the reading assignment. It was a short story about a kid who got lost in the woods. I couldn't focus on it very well. My mind kept jumping to the school and what I would say if people asked questions. Mom made spaghetti for dinner and we ate together as a family. Nobody talked about the hospital or the medication or Friday's CPS visit. We just had normal dinner conversation about Dad's work project and what was on TV later. After dinner, I went back to my room and played games on my phone. Around 8, my sister video called like she promised. Her face filled the screen and she was sitting at her desk in her dorm room. We talked about her biology class and how hard the tests were. She complained about her roommate leaving dirty dishes everywhere. I told her about the show we both watch and what happened in the latest episode. We argued about which character was the best. She talked about some drama with her friends and a party she went to last weekend. It felt good to talk about normal stuff that had nothing to do with hospitals or medications or any of the mess from this week. We talked for almost an hour just bouncing between random topics. Right before we hung up, she got quiet for a second. She said she was proud of me for handling everything so well. She said a lot of kids would have freaked out or gotten really upset, but I stayed calm. That made me feel stronger somehow, like maybe I could handle going back to the school tomorrow. Thursday morning, I felt sick getting ready. My hands shook while I brushed my teeth. Mom made me eat breakfast even though I wasn't hungry. She said I needed energy for the day. Dad was already at work, but he texted me good luck. Mom drove me instead of making me take the bus, which I really appreciated. The bus would have meant facing everyone all at once with no escape. We pulled up to the school entrance and I saw Miss McGregor waiting by the front doors. She waved when she saw our car. Mom squeezed my hand and told me I'd be okay. Ms. McGregor walked over as I got out. She asked how I was feeling and I said nervous. She said that was totally normal and she'd walk me to first period. Having her next to me made me feel less anxious about all the kids in the hallway. We walked through the main entrance and kids were everywhere getting stuff from their lockers. A few people looked at me, but most were too busy with their own stuff. Ms. McGregor talked to me about normal things like the weather and weekend plans. She walked me all the way to Mrs. Harrison's math class. Mrs. Harrison smiled when she saw me and said welcome back. I took my usual seat and tried to act normal. A couple kids asked where I'd been. I used the script Miss McGregor gave me. I said I had a medical issue, I was fine now, and I didn't really want to talk about it. Most people just nodded and moved on. One kid, Tyler, made a joke about it being something embarrassing, but his friend Jake told him to shut up and they dropped it. By the end of first period, I realized it wasn't as bad as I'd feared. Second period was English, and again a few people asked but accepted my answer. At lunch, I sat with my regular group of friends. Donnie asked if I was really okay. I told them the basic truth without details. I said I accidentally took some medication that made me really sick, and I had to spend a night in the hospital. They were sympathetic but didn't push for more information. Sarah said her cousin had something similar happen with allergy medicine. By the end of lunch, we were talking about normal stuff again. The rest of the day went by faster than I expected. By final period, I realized most people didn't actually care that much about my drama. Everyone was too focused on their own lives and problems. The gossip had probably already moved on to something else. Friday morning, the CPS caseworker arrived at 10. She was a woman in her 30s wearing business clothes. She introduced herself, but I don't remember her name. She was professional, but not mean about it. She asked to see where medications were stored now. Dad showed her upstairs to his closet and opened the lockbox. He explained the combination system and the new household rules. She wrote things down on a clipboard. She looked around the house, asked Mom some questions about our daily routine, and checked the kitchen cabinets. She talked to me alone for a few minutes. She asked if I felt safe at home and if my parents had explained medication safety. I told her yes to everything because it was true. After about 40 minutes, she said everything looked appropriate. She told my parents the case would be closed since they'd taken all the right steps. Dad looked relieved when she left. Friday afternoon, Mom drove me to Dr. Temple's office for my follow-up appointment. The waiting room had the same kids' magazines and fish tank as always. Dr. Temple called us back and had me sit on the exam table. She listened to my heart with her stethoscope for a long time. She took my blood pressure twice. She asked me questions about how I'd been feeling. Everything checked out completely normal. She said I was cleared to return to regular activities, including PE class. She told my parents they'd handled the situation really well, and the safety measures they put in place were exactly right. Mom thanked her and scheduled my next regular checkup for 3 months from now. Over the weekend, Dad had an appointment with his own doctor. He came home Saturday afternoon and told Mom he was switching to regular pills instead of the mint form. He said the pills were easier to store safely, and nobody would mistake them for candy. He seemed relieved to have found a better solution. The new prescription would be ready by Monday. Sunday night felt different from the rest of the week. Everyone was more relaxed. Mom made my favorite meal, which was chicken parmesan with garlic bread. We sat at the dinner table and actually laughed about some of the crazy parts of what happened. My sister's dramatic texts made us all crack up when Mom read them out loud. Dad's face when Megan asked what medication I'd taken was apparently hilarious, according to Mom. It felt good to find some humor in it now that everything was okay. The hospital bill arrived Monday in a big envelope. Mom and Dad sat at the kitchen table going through all the papers. The total was high, but they said it was manageable with the payment plan. They spent an hour going over the budget and figuring out where to adjust things. They made it clear they weren't making me feel guilty about the cost. Dad said my health was worth any amount of money. Mom agreed and said they were just glad I was okay. They set up automatic payments and filed everything away. Monday morning, I walked into school expecting the worst, but got something way different. A few kids asked how I was feeling, and I used the same basic answer from Thursday. Nobody pushed for details or made jokes. By second period, I realized most people had already moved on to other stuff. There was drama about someone's boyfriend texting another girl, and a fight that almost happened at lunch on Friday. My hospital stay was old news. At lunch, my friends talked about weekend plans and video games. Donnie mentioned my absence once just to check I was really okay, and then we talked about normal things. By the end of the day, I felt stupid for being so worried. Middle school kids forget stuff fast when there's always new gossip happening. That Wednesday, Patrick called the house and talked to my parents for about 20 minutes. I could hear Dad explaining how the lockbox was working and showing him we'd moved to regular pills instead of mints. Mom walked him through our new routine for checking medications were locked up. Patrick asked a bunch of questions about whether there had been any other safety issues or concerns. Dad told him everything was going smoothly, and we'd followed all the recommendations from the hospital. Patrick said he was satisfied with how the family had responded, and he was closing the case officially. Mom thanked him and hung up looking relieved. Dad sat down at the kitchen table and let out a huge breath like he'd been holding it for days. Friday afternoon, my sister came home for the weekend. She brought her laundry and a bag of snacks from the campus store. After dinner, we ended up in the living room, just the two of us, while Mom and Dad cleaned up. She asked how I was really doing, and I told her honestly that I felt fine now. She admitted she'd been really scared when Mom called from the hospital that first day. She said she kept imagining the worst possible outcomes and didn't know what to do stuck at college 2 hours away. I told her it helped a lot having her there at the hospital and how she made everything feel less awful by just being normal. She smiled and said she was glad she could help. We sat there quiet for a minute and then started watching a show together. It felt different between us now. Not bad different, just closer somehow. 2 weeks after everything happened, I noticed things felt completely back to normal. The lockbox in Dad's closet was just part of the routine now. Nobody thought twice about it. Mom and Dad were more careful about all safety stuff in general. They started locking cleaning supplies under the sink and keeping sharp things put away better. At the school, my friends had totally forgotten about my hospital stay. We talked about homework and games and regular stuff. Nobody brought up that Thursday I left early or asked follow-up questions. I was just another kid again instead of the one with the medical emergency. My grades were fine and I'd caught up on all the work I missed. PE class was normal. Everything was normal. The hospital bill payment showed up on the credit card statement, and Mom showed it to Dad at the kitchen table. They'd set it to auto-pay so they wouldn't have to think about it every month. Mom said they adjusted the budget by cutting back on eating out and some subscription services they didn't really use. It wasn't causing huge stress. Just a minor thing they'd deal with for the next several months. Dad said at least the insurance covered most of it. Mom agreed and said my health was worth way more than any amount of money. They filed the statement away and went back to making dinner. One night, about 3 weeks in, Dad knocked on my bedroom door while I was doing homework. He came in and sat on the edge of my bed. He said he wanted to thank me for being so mature about everything that happened. He said a lot of kids would have been really angry or held a grudge against him for the mistake. I told him everyone makes mistakes and I could see he'd done everything possible to make sure it never happened again. He looked relieved when I said that. We talked for a few more minutes about school and regular stuff, and then he left. It felt good to clear the air completely. That same weekend, my sister was home again, and we had a moment alone in the kitchen. She was making a sandwich and I was getting a drink. She said at least I had a crazy story for when I was older, even if I couldn't tell it yet. We both laughed about how someday this would be a funny family story instead of an embarrassing nightmare. She said in 10 years we'd probably joke about it at Thanksgiving. I said maybe in 20 years. We laughed again, and it felt way less heavy than it did 2 weeks ago. The whole thing was already starting to feel like something that happened a long time ago, instead of recently. Sunday afternoon, Mom was doing something at the kitchen counter with a marker and paper. I walked over and saw she was writing down rules. She had a list of the new medication safety rules we'd all agreed on. All medications in the lockbox. Only take what's prescribed to you. Always ask an adult first. She laminated the paper with the machine we use for school projects and stuck it on the fridge with a magnet. It looked official there in Mom's neat handwriting. Everyone in the family knew the rules now, and seeing them written down made it feel important and permanent. 3 weeks after everything happened, I realized one morning that I felt completely normal again. My heart was fine when I checked my pulse. My energy was back to regular levels. I wasn't anxious about school or what people might think or say. The whole experience felt distant somehow, like it happened to someone else even though I knew it was real and serious. I could remember being in the hospital and feeling scared, but it didn't have the same weight anymore. It was just a thing that happened and now it was over. Life settled into a comfortable routine where the incident was just part of our family history. Not a current crisis or something we talked about every day. We were closer as a family because we went through something scary together and came out okay on the other side. The lockbox sat in Dad's closet doing its job. I never thought twice about taking random mints or pills I found anywhere. That habit was completely gone. We learned our lesson as a family, made our changes, moved forward without drama or trauma hanging over us. Everything was just normal life again. That is how it went for me. But now I want to hear your version because you always have something interesting to add. Share your thoughts in the comments and I will be reading through them later. You never disappoint.